you get a trial, folks, just realize that at the beginning, will you? This is a test from God. And the only way to let the test have its perfect work is to go through the thing. Look at the word there that says bear. It has a preposition connected with it. The verb part means to carry, and the hupa, the preposition, means under. You are under, and you're going to have to go the whole way. It's like the word endurance, hupamone, to remain under. The only way you can go through is to remain under the thing. And let it have its work, and let it strengthen. The way out is through. You say, all right, John, I understand that God's going to bring tests, and Satan's going to try to turn them into temptations, solicitation to evil, and my flesh will do that. And God will be faithful, and he will never let me get into one that I can't handle. But I have to realize that the only way I'm going to be able to handle this thing is to realize I got to go through it, and that I've got to endure. Now, how do I endure? Now you get down to the nitty-gritty. How do you endure? I'm going to give you 3 keys. Number 1, pray. Watch and pray, Mark 14:38 says, lest you enter into what? Temptation. Your test can turn into a temptation if you don't pray. Boy, I tell you, the first thing that happens in a trial, what is it? What do you do? The first thing you do when you get a test or a trial? Pray. God, I'm defenseless. Lord, lead us not into temptation. Don't get me into a situation I can't handle. Father, deliver me from the evil one. Lord, I lean on you. I must have your strength. Watch and pray lest you enter into this thing. All right, he says, let your trial be a trial. And let it continue to be a trial. Don't let it turn into a temptation and a solicitation to sin. And to do that, you got to pray. You got to give it to God. Number 2, you have to trust. You have to trust. You say, what do I have to trust? You have to trust that God has sent you the trial for a great purpose, right? To strengthen you. Like Peter says, after you have suffered a while, 1 Peter 5:10, God's going to make you perfect. And he says in verse 9 there, resist the devil steadfast in faith. Faith in what? That God has a purpose. Boy, here comes the trial, here comes the trouble, here comes Satan and all of this thing, and I'm believing God in his purpose. If you can just let that stay external and say, God has a purpose in this. Oh, God, I give you that trial. I ask you to take care of me in it, and I trust your purpose in it, and I'm going through. That's the way out. And you get done, you look back and you say, woo, feel strong. A new lesson, strengthening. A perfect work is done. If you collapse in the middle, you've blown it. The third point, pray, trust, and focus on Christ. You know who was the greatest who ever lived at enduring temptation? At enduring trials, who? Christ. The greatest. He could take these tests and endure them right to the limit. He was tested by Satan, tested and tested and tested and tested and tested. And you know what I've always said? I've always said that he had the worst test because he never fell at any point, so he ran them all out to the end. In Hebrews 12:3-4, it says, hey, when you get weary and tired, remember Christ, will you? You haven't yet resisted striving unto blood. You're not dead yet. If you think you've got it rough, remember him. Remember what he endured. To sum it up, beloved, it's simple. You're going to have tests. They're going to come in your life. Just keep them tests, will you? And don't let them become temptations. And to do that, you have to endure. And to endure, you pray and you trust God's purposes and you lean on Jesus Christ and focus on what he went through. Now, let me give you an illustration to show how this works. And I like Pilgrim's Progress, and this has a great illustration of it. Christian and hopeful are on their merry way to the celestial city down the King's Highway. And they get diverted, and they're laying in a field sleeping. Only problem is the field is private ground. It belongs to the giant of despair. He's called Giant Despair, and he lives in Doubting Castle. And this great Doubting Castle and Giant Despair. Giant Despair comes out of his castle and finds Christian and hopeful asleep and grabs him and throws him in a dungeon. So Christian and hopeful are in a slimy, smelly dungeon, locked behind a series of bars, a whole series of them. And the giant comes down, and the giant's wife's always telling him what to do. The giant comes down and beats them up. Doesn't kill them, but beats them up so much they want to kill themselves. That's a great definition of despair, isn't it? And so they languish. This is a trial. And they're in despair and doubt. And Christian finally says, what a fool I am to lie in this stinking dungeon, says to hopeful. when I may as well walk at liberty. I have a key in my bosom that will open any lock in Doubting Castle. And he reaches in and he pulls out this key, and it's got promise written on it. And he takes the key of promise and he unlocks the bars, and he goes to the next and unlocks the next, all the way till he unlocks the final gate and walks out, and the giant's running down this deal after him. Well, what is John Bunyan saying? John Bunyan is saying is this: you're going to have trials in life. And if you let those trials turn into temptation, you're going to end up in the Doubting Castle under the key, under the lock of giant despair. But you know what will get you out of that? The knowledge of God's what? Promises. The knowledge of God's promises. To know that God has a purpose, that God is faithful, that God's going to bring you through, that God's going to do a perfect work, that God will never leave you alone, that there's no temptation taking you, but will have a way out, and that way is through. What those promises do is unlock doubt and despair. So, when we abuse our liberty and our trials turn into temptations, none of them is ever more than we can handle. What a promise. But if we fall, nobody to blame but ourselves. Let that be a comfort and let it be a warning. Father, thank you for our look at your word. And we've really just introduced some thought in a very provocative area. Help us to realize that we can't always tell why things happen the way they do. But help us to realize, Father, that you're bringing things to pass in our life not to draw us into sin, but to do the very opposite. And when we are drawn into sin, we have perverted that thing which you've brought in our lives to perfect us. We thank you for the lessons learned in that. Teach us, Father, further as we study and think on these things. In Jesus' name, amen.
Escaping a trial is not about getting out, it's about passing through. And if you're a follower of Christ, he'll provide all that you need to endure every trial. That's John Macarthur's message today on Grace to You as he continues his study, Pitfalls of Christian Liberty. John, one important aspect of Christian liberty is where to attend church. With that in mind, we received a call on the Q&A line recently from a woman who is pursuing God, but she's struggling to find a church. Let's hear that question, and then, of course, John, please respond.
Betty Jean, San Pablo, California. Dr. MacArthur, I have two choices of churches to go to, either the Greasy Grace churches or the